Hi everybody, hello, welcome to tonight's Let's Talk Teenager session. It's amazing to see so many parents and carers here, not quite as many as we were expecting, so we are hoping that some people will join us along the way. Thank you so much for giving up an hour and a half of your evening to come along, and we're sure that you will find tonight's session helpful. I'm Em Stevens from the Safety and Resilience Consultancy, and with my colleague Chloe Pope, yeah, we will be facilitating tonight's session. Chloe recently got married, so I'm having trouble remembering what her surname is. Our Safety and Resilience Consultancy was a partnership that was set up to support you with the challenges of looking after your children and young people in what feels like an ever-changing landscape. So with this amount of people on the platform, it can make our IT a bit temperamental. So you will see that your cameras and mics are muted. This does mean that unfortunately, Chloe and I cannot respond to any raised hands during tonight's session. But the chat bar is open, so please do put any comments or questions in. You'll find that this is a great way to support each other, especially if you've used a service, we have some tools that work for you. Please do share this information with the group. However, we all know that every family is different, so because something works for someone else doesn't mean that it will work for you. And also, we are very aware that services are very stretched and that you may not always have had the response support that you needed. However, please do try and keep things positive. We want this to be a safe, caring space for you to support each other. And for us, sometimes it can be difficult to present tonight's session and give appropriate answers to, say there might be a question that needs a little bit more thought rather than a quick public reply in the chat. If that is the case, please be assured that we won't be ignoring your question and we will respond to you by email after the session. Please do be respectful of each other, and for confidentiality reasons, do not give names or identifying features of your children or young people. The session tonight will be recorded for those that miss it, but your names and comments in the chat bar will not be visible to anyone watching the recording back. And our toolkit that accompanies these sessions will be shared with you if it hasn't already been via email. We have run these sessions a few times previously and we've had some really good feedback. We've taken on board a few things and we've changed these slightly just to keep up to date with our ever-changing world. So if you've attended it before, there may be new things for you to hear, or it may be that you've just come along again as a reminder. If that's the case, it's great to have you back again. And one last housekeeping comment. We really encourage you to share what you hear over this evening with your young people, but some of the content you will need to think about before you share with them. So tonight is not really suitable for your teenagers to listen to. So please try and sit somewhere where they can't hear or pop some headphones in. And also some of the content that we will share tonight may be difficult for you to hear. We're not going to apologise for that because it's important you know what your children and young people are facing. But one positive of being at home and listening remotely to us on the sofa is that you can mute us, you can take a break, and when you return, we may have moved on. This is a really good way of looking after yourselves. And remember, these sessions are not about telling you how to be the perfect parent. That person doesn't actually exist, but just to make you aware of some of the risks and issues that you may come up against. As professionals, Chloe and I go on lots of training and lots of awareness events, but we're always very aware that the people who support children the most, you as parents and carers, are often not given this information. Being responsible for teenage humans is hard work, and to do a good job, you really need to look after yourselves. So this is the agenda for tonight and the following 2 weeks so that you know what's coming up. So tonight we're going to be looking at the basics of our teenagers' brain and their development, looking at their social and emotional changes. We're also going to be looking at healthy and unhealthy relationships, and that theme is going to follow through for the 3 sessions. We're going to look at how we all feel about body image, and we're going to look at the tough subject of toxic masculinity and how it can be shaped by your family life. Then week 2, next week, well, we call that our tough week because we are looking at more community risks, things like county line, gang crime, grooming. We're also going to be looking at social media and the safety planning around that, and more about those unhealthy teenage relationships that your family might find themselves in. And then week 3, we're really looking at family strengthening. So looking at all the things we've heard over the last couple of weeks and how to actually have some of those difficult conversations with your young people. We're going to look at the importance of role modelling, and we're going to look at both our teenagers and our emotional well-being. So we all know that parenting is the hardest job you will ever do, and that parenting teenagers is probably the hardest emotional job you will ever do. I'm sure we all have nights when we're exhausted by 9 p.m. despite not having a particularly physically hard day. But remember, you've had an emotionally challenging day parenting your teenager. It's a complete roller coaster, isn't it? 1 minute you're the best parent in the world, and then literally a few seconds later you're the worst parent, and apparently you've ruined someone's whole life. So we want to try and address some of these common themes and stresses. So each week our session is split really into two parts: what the challenges are, and then what we might be able to do to help. No magic wands, I'm afraid, just helping you understand what might be going on in your teenager's world. And like I said right at the beginning, do remember that every family is totally unique, and what works for the person next door might not work for you. Children, especially teenagers, do not fit into neat little tick boxes. So firstly tonight, I'm going to talk a bit about some of the biological changes that are taking place during puberty. These are things that we and they have no control over. But what we can do is change our responses to some of these biological events. And then after this, Chloe's going to take you through some of the societal pressures that all our young people are facing. So let's have a very quick look inside your teenager's head. What's going on in there right now? So the brain reaches its biggest size in early adolescence, and there's a lot of very quick growth happening. I guess maybe all of us have suggested at some point in our lives that we think females mature quicker than males, but there's actually scientific proof that this is true. However, it's not long before the boys catch up. So for our girls, the brain reaches its biggest size at around 11, and for boys, it's around age 14. However, although the brains are fully grown, they don't finish developing and maturing until the mid to late 20s. So these teenage years last a very long time. When we expect our 16, 17 and 18-year-olds to be making those mature adult decisions, we're asking more of them than they're actually capable of. They cannot always make those decisions in a mature, measured way that we'd like them to. So the front part of the brain here is called the prefrontal cortex, and it's one of the last brain regions to mature. And this area is responsible for all our skills like planning, prioritizing, and controlling our impulses. So because these skills are still developing, teenagers are much more likely to engage in risky behaviors without considering the potential results of their decisions. Their brain is not able yet to join all those actions to the possible consequences. However, that same brain is poised and ready to learn and to adapt. Your teenager's brain has lots of plasticity, which means it can change, adapt, and respond really quickly to its environment. Therefore, we need to challenge it. So tough schoolwork, exercise, creative activities will all really help their brains to mature and learn. Keeping them busy and challenged throughout their teenage years is really important. But ongoing changes in the brain, along with physical, emotional and social changes, makes our teenagers really vulnerable to mental health problems. All the big changes the brain is experiencing explains why adolescence is a time when many mental health issues, such as anxiety, depression, and eating disorders, can start to emerge. Teenagers' brains are far more vulnerable to stress than our adult brains. And we're going to talk throughout our sessions about what some of these stresses are and how we can help our teenagers. And all this brain development means that teenagers need more sleep than adults and children. It's a fact. Your teenager is not just being lazy lying in bed. Research shows that melatonin, which is basically the sleep hormone, the levels in a teenager's blood are naturally higher later at night and drop later in the morning of teenagers. And this may explain why so many teenagers stay up late and then struggle with getting up in the morning. Ideally, our teenagers should get about 9 to 10 hours of good, decent sleep a night. I'm guessing most of them don't get that much. And that lack of sleep can make it really difficult to pay attention. It can increase impulsivity, and increase the risk for irritability or depression. So all of this is summed up in a quick little video that I'm about to show you. You could also share this with your young person as well, because it might help them to make sense of it all a little bit.
Between childhood and adulthood, our hormones kickstart a phase of significant change. And while the physical changes of adolescence may be obvious, less visible are changes that these hormones trigger in our brains, which might just be responsible for turning our teenage years into a bit of a roller coaster. Throughout our lives, our brains undergo a process called neural pruning. The synapses through which our neurons communicate are either lost or strengthened, depending on how much we use them. Well-used synapses grow strong, while the weaker ones fade away. It's this process that makes us capable of faster, clearer, and more complex thought as we grow up. But, crucially, pruning happens at different rates in different areas of the brain. By the time we're adolescents, the neural networks that communicate emotion, risk and reward are well developed, while others, which may help us to plan, prioritise, think logically and moderate our social behaviour, are yet to mature. So, a potential mismatch between our emotion and our judgment arises just as our emotional and social worlds are becoming more complex, making an increase in social anxiety quite normal at this time. Researchers at the University of Oxford want to know how this might affect our behaviour as we progress through our teenage years. In a recent study, they focused on the social worries many of us feel as adolescents. When presented with photographs of ambiguous social scenes and asked to imagine themselves in the picture, anxious younger teens were more likely than others to perceive negativity. But while these heightened emotions and the struggle to control them can make adolescence a difficult time for some, it's also a golden time for learning and growth. The adolescent brain is particularly agile and flexible, and as such, it's especially open to new opportunities, new technologies, and new experiences. So while our teenage years may feel pretty weird, they're also pretty wonderful. To explore how your brain develops, visit www.oxfordsparks.ox.ac.uk and tell us what you think on our Facebook and Twitter.
I love the bit at the end there that reminds us that although the teenage years might be really difficult, they're also really wonderful. That's what we're trying to hold on to. So we've taken a brief look at the biological changes, but how is this going to affect day-to-day life for us all? What does it look like? So firstly, what we're going to see is our young people seeking more independence. So this is likely to influence the decision that your child makes and the relationships that your child has with family and friends. They now want to do things on their own, even when it's a bit scary, or if you feel that they're not capable. It's not okay for you to walk with them anywhere or be seen dropping them off or picking them up. They may still want you to, but they're also looking for ways now to survive without you. So unless the consequences are unsafe, we would recommend that you let them try, but be there to pick them up if they fail. We all learn by experiences, don't we? Just telling your teenager that something won't work. So maybe find a compromise, maybe meet them halfway through their journey. This also helps them not to have to lose face or back down when they realise that actually walking home late at night is scary. Or consider getting them to check in with you at certain checkpoints on that journey. The nature of teenage brain development means that teenagers are likely to seek out new experiences and, as we said, engage in more risk-taking behaviour. So teenagers are more likely than you to engage in dangerous driving, hence those huge insurance costs. They're more likely to engage in binge drinking, drug use, risky sexual behaviours, etc. Sometimes they can see the risk, but they are still developing control over these impulses. And that means they're likely to make wrong or unsafe decisions. Teenagers are also more likely to focus on their peers in decision making. So there are moments when they really do care more about what their friends think of them than what you think. Suddenly you're making their life boring. We never do anything, and they're looking for that constant excitement or something to post on their Instagram page. Social media plays a big part in this because it makes it look like everyone else's life is way more exciting than theirs. And sometimes the number of likes from a post is a way that teens can validate some of their decision making. It's that peer acceptance that they're looking for. Don't forget that our teenagers are searching for identity. Young people are busy working out who they are and where they fit in the world. Until now, this has generally been shaped by you, their family. Now that search is influenced by their peer group, by what's going on in the background, by media, by school, by gender, and also still by your expectations of them. There's a lot to work through before you feel confident in who you are. Most of us evolve throughout our life in this, but not as much as we do in our teenage years. And it really does take a lot of brain capacity to work through all of this. And then we come to sex. Wow, their hormones are really kicking in now. So these hormones affect teenagers' mood, their emotions, their impulses, as well as their bodies. And the mood swings that we see our teenagers experience is caused by these fluctuations in estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, the sex hormones. These same hormones affect the way that they think about dating. So our teenagers suddenly become much more interested in sex, sometimes to the point of obsession as these hormones kick into gear. It may be really difficult for you to think that your teenager's body and mind are being controlled by the forces of nature instead of being directed by your guidance. Many adolescents feel that the changes they're experiencing due to these teenage hormones are weird, freakish, or unnatural. And in fact, almost everything that teens go through during adolescence is a normal part of their development, but they will need your reassurance of this. They also tend to assume that all their friends are having sex, even if they're not. Chloe's going to discuss keeping them safe with you in those first relationships in a bit. But the most important thing you can take away from this evening is to make it okay to talk about sex with your teenagers. It's proved that teenagers who feel comfortable talking openly to a parent or another adult about sex are less likely to go through with something that they really don't want to do. They're also less likely to have an unplanned pregnancy or to contract an STI. If you can give your teenager the sense that you are open to anything that they have to say, good or bad, they are much more likely to share with you what is going on in their lives. Please try and encourage honest discussions of sexuality and answer these questions as frankly as possible. Every family here tonight is going to have its own values and beliefs about sexual activity in the teenage years. And the important thing is that these beliefs are communicated clearly, and that the opportunity to talk about them and discuss is always left open. Try not to react badly or judge them if they tell you something that you don't like. We need to try and remember that once upon a time we experienced the same feelings and drives as our teenage children do now. Try and think back to your first love and how obsessed you were and how intense those feelings were. You might not want to share that with your teenager, but try and think back to what those feelings were like. As we said, in week 3, we are going to look in more detail about how to have some of these difficult conversations and keep those channels of communication open. But we have got some clips later tonight that you can share that could be great conversation openers. I know it can be embarrassing, but it really helps if we can get over it. You may also find now that your teenager shows really strong feelings and intense emotions at different times. Their moods are going to seem really unpredictable. And these emotional ups and downs when you're living in the same home as them is going to lead to increased conflict. So your child's brain is still learning how to control and express emotions in a grown-up way. They may appear to be totally oblivious or insensitive to your emotions. But as time goes on, they will get better at reading and processing other people's emotions. But while they're developing these skills, they can often misread facial expressions or body language, and apologising is so difficult. So our teenagers are thinking way more about right and wrong, and so they'll start developing a stronger individual set of values and morals. They'll learn that they're responsible for their own actions, decisions, and consequences, and therefore they'll start to challenge more things. So your words and actions have previously shaped your child's sense of right and wrong, which means that there may be lots of arguments coming up with you about just about everything. And I could list 1,000 behaviours that are risky to us that our teenagers will not see as dangerous in any way. They don't see risk in the same way that we do. Their brains are just not developed enough to weigh up the risk and make a balanced decision. They're infallible, remember? Nothing can hurt them, right? But that's fine until something does hurt them. And then they need a parent or carer. They need a responsible adult. They and we are not superheroes. Things do hurt and they need someone to offload to and be available. So you've heard enough of me talking. Chloe's now going to talk you through a few of the challenges that your young people were facing, and then we'll look at what we can do to help them and help us. Chloe.
Thank you, Emma, and good evening, everyone. So, relationships. Let's talk a little bit about relationships. As young people progress through secondary school, you're likely to find that they might start forming those relationships. And this can be quite an overwhelming experience for us as a parent because it's new. How much do we get involved? How many questions do we ask? Well, we feel that it's really important to ask your young people questions about their relationship, mainly to make sure that their relationship is healthy, safe, and appropriate, but to also show that you're interested in their life and who they're connecting with. So really try and think about what you need to know, such as how they met their partner or maybe how old they are. Do remember that it's very normal now for young people to meet online, even when they're in school. But also remember that meeting online, of course, comes with those additional risks. So if your young person has met their boyfriend or their girlfriend online and they're yet to meet face to face, it is important that some safety planning, of course, comes alongside this. We would always recommend that an adult is present for this meeting. They may not want you there, but it's okay to remind them that you are the parent and you do set the rules. You could even suggest that they meet somewhere like Costa and you're also in there but on a separate table. This might reduce some of that embarrassment for the young person, but they know that you're there if you do need them. Even if they haven't met online, try and get to know them. Take that opportunity to meet your young person's love interest and get to know them that little bit more. You could ask your teenagers questions like, how do they treat you? What is it that you like best about them? And what do you like doing with them? Opening up that conversation from the start is really important in case anything was to go really wrong. They know that you care about their relationship and that you're there to help them. So I want to start this next section just by reminding you all as parents that most relationships that our young people will enter will be healthy, safe and supportive. But just a bit of a warning, I will be spending around the next kind of 10 to 15 minutes talking about unhealthy and abusive relationships. So this is just a little bit of a health warning that if this sounds like it will be a triggering topic to you or an upsetting topic, please do feel free to put me on mute, make yourself a cup of tea, and then come back once we've moved on to the next topic in, like I said, about 10 or 15 minutes. So I guess if I was to say the words domestic abuse, we'd all have a pretty similar picture in our heads. We might automatically think about physical violence occurring particularly within adult relationships. But the reality is domestic abuse is much, much more than that. Domestic abuse can of course happen to anyone, and that's anyone of any age, any gender, religion, class or ethnicity. But tonight we will just be focusing on young people. So Safe Lives, which are a national domestic abuse charity, collect all of the statistics and data around domestic abuse. And their most recent research has found that 25% of girls and 18% of boys aged between 13 and 17 have experienced some form of physical violence from an intimate partner. They also found that 31% of girls have experienced some form of sexual abuse, sexual violence, or sexual harassment within their relationships. And sexual harassment can be anything from using sexually insulting language to something more extreme, such as rape. So I appreciate that these statistics are shocking, very upsetting, and we're probably all sitting here potentially quite worried about our young person's relationships. But please try and remember that we're still not talking about the majority of young people here. And according to the statistics, it's still more likely that your child will experience a healthy relationship rather than an unhealthy relationship. But it happens. It might not necessarily happen to your young person, but you might notice warning signs in what they tell you about their friends' relationships, for examples. Domestic abuse is often hidden and there is a huge stigma around it. So opening up that conversation at home can be really helpful in that way to kind of start breaking down that taboo and helping your young person to engage in these open conversations. So let's start with what domestic abuse actually is. So according to our legal definition, domestic abuse is an incident or pattern of incidents of controlling, coercive, threatening, degrading, or violent behaviour. So the power and control wheel, which should currently be on your screen right now, can really help us to understand this definition further. So these different sections of the wheel help us to understand how someone could gain power and control over another person. I won't go through all of these with you tonight, but I think it's important that we do touch on the ones that are most prevalent in young people's relationships. So I'm going to start with using intimidation. So using intimidation, that means using scary behaviour. Behaviour that would leave the other person in the relationship feeling fearful, walking on eggshells, or scared to put a foot wrong. So this can be something as simple as the way that they look at the other person to damaging property, smashing things, throwing objects around, or throwing things at the wall. Then we've got emotional abuse. So emotional abuse is potentially the most common type of abuse. So 91% of people who have been in an abusive relationship report there to have been some level of emotional abuse involved within their relationship. So emotional abuse in teenagers could be things like put downs, name calling, playing mind games. You might hear emotional abuse be referred to as things like psychological abuse, and can also fall under that category of verbal abuse as well. Then we've got isolation. So isolation is also very commonly seen within abusive relationships. But in terms of young people's relationships, this will often involve them making the other partner feel bad, and that's for things like seeing their friends, for example. However, please do remember that within teenage relationships especially, it's often very normal for them to want to spend all of their time with their new partner, especially if the relationship is new. But isolation is different because there will be some level of fear involved. So the victim in the relationship would likely feel scared as to what would happen if they don't spend all of their time with their partner. Then we've got using coercion and threats. So coercive control only actually became a crime in 2015. It's obviously something that has always been around, but it involves much more of a pattern of behaviours rather than that one-off incident. So this pattern normally results in the abusive behaviours getting worse as time goes on and can leave that victim feeling trapped. Commonly in young people, we tend to see the threat of suicide, that if the victim ended that relationship, then the abusive person may threaten to end their own life, for example, which is obviously a huge pressure on that other young person within the relationship. And other behaviours that would fall under this category could include things like threats, and that's either making that threat or carrying it out, such as a threat to share nude pictures or spread rumours about them. So on your screen now is the cycle of abuse. So the cycle of abuse shows that typical pattern that occurs within abusive relationships. So starting from the top, any relationship will normally start at the honeymoon phase, which is absolutely no different within an abusive relationship. So on your screen now, that's just at the bottom of the cycle of abuse, the honeymoon phase. So during this phase, everything is so lovely. There might be a lot of gift giving and a lot of positive time spent together. This stage is really, really exciting, especially for our young people when relationships are new to them. Generally speaking, in healthy relationships, this phase might fade out slightly, but the relationship will then stay at a calm phase. However, in unhealthy or abusive relationships, they will then go round to that tension building phase. So when we've worked with victims before, they've described to us that this phase is like walking on eggshells, for example. So they might know that an abusive episode is brewing, but they're often not sure on when this will occur or what in particular might trigger it. This phase can last for minutes, hours, or even days. The victim will often feel quite hyper aware to the abusive person in this phase and try and manage their own behaviour to reduce the kind of likelihood of that abusive episode happening. So we then come around to that abusive incident, which can be physical, emotional, or sexual. And then we see that cycle repeat itself, and repeat itself. So victims often report that the abusive person will minimise, deny, or blame after that abusive incident has occurred. So they might do this by saying things like, I hardly touched you, so that would be minimising. They might refuse to acknowledge that it happened, so they might say something like, you're making it up, I never did anything wrong. Or they might blame, so that would be saying things like, well, if you didn't upset me, I wouldn't have done it. Within abusive relationships, we see that honeymoon phase is really often quite exaggerated. So again, it might involve lots of gift giving and a real outpouring of love. So this cycle of abuse that you can see on your screens and that I've just explained can really help us to understand why young people may stay in relationships that aren't healthy. Yes, we have those two phases that are abusive, but we also have this honeymoon and calm phase. So it can be really, really difficult to break this cycle. And that's because it's really unlikely that young people are going to want to leave when things are really nice and really calm in that honeymoon phase. But also it's very difficult and can be quite unsafe to leave in that tension building or that abusive phase. So how can we actually know if a young person is in an abusive relationship? We know that everyone and every relationship is so different, but here are some common signs that you might see within your young person that might be a warning that their relationship is either abusive or unhealthy. So one sign we might see is some physical signs. So think about bruising, especially if bruising is unexplained. Or think about kind of red marks that might look quite new and quite fresh or even slightly older. Think about them being overly defensive of their partner. Think about them having a drastic change in their behavioral mood, and that might be kind of a real sudden low mood or anxiety, or even the total opposite, such as exaggerated confidence. Be alert for them being kind of overly secretive, not wanting to tell you too much. I spoke at the start about really trying to get to know your young person's partner. If they're not willing to share with you things like their age, what they do, if they have a job, their history, things about their family, think about why that might be. Watch out for them kind of constantly being on their phone. I know that teenagers always seem to constantly be on their phone, but think about kind of their body language while they're on their phone. So are they seeming quite frightened if they're on their phone, or quite on edge when they receive a text message, for example? We do know that these can be really common and normal behaviours that we see from young people. So the key to look out for is change. So you know your young person better than anyone else. Has their behaviour really suddenly changed? And are you seeing a few of these signs together? If so, always trust your gut in these situations. As I've said, you know your young person better than anyone. So at this point in the session, it feels that the world is pretty gloomy. But please remember, like I said, it is unlikely that your young person is experiencing all of these problems or even any of them at all. But knowledge really is power here, and it's important that we talk about these issues because they are stigmatized and they are hidden. Domestic abuse and sexual harassment or assault all involve people pushing or even totally disregarding the boundaries that our young people have. However, how do we really know that our young people fully know what boundaries are? And how do we know that they know how to have those boundaries or even how to respect other people's boundaries? So under that category of boundaries falls that major factor of consent. Consent is a very, very challenging term to define, especially when it comes to sex and relationships. I know that when I think about consent, I think about those consent forms that we all have to fill out about how maybe a service uses our data. But the reality is that we never enter relationships asking the other person to sign consent that they will respect us, that they will love us, and that they will support us. We just expect that to happen. The same goes for sex. Our young people are not signing consent forms to agree to have sex with another person. So how do we actually define it when the idea of consent is actually really quite complex? Well, I want to show you this clip now. Some of you might have seen it before. It's called the cup of tea consent video. It's a really nice, easy way to help our young people to understand consent. So this clip in particular relates to sexual consent. However, the basic premise of it could be used for anything really to highlight what consent is.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they go, "Oh my God, I would love a cup of tea. Thank you." Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you could make them a cup of tea or not, but be aware they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important part, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you are entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say no, thank you, then don't make them tea at all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, "Yes, please. That's kind of you." And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time that it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind. And you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they're unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea. And they can't answer the question, "Do you want tea?" Because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea. And they said yes. But in the time it took you to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down. Make sure the unconscious person is safe. And this is the important part again. Don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they'd finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they're safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it, going, "But you wanted tea last week." Or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat, going, "But you wanted tea last night." But if you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you're able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand it when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to go make myself a cup of tea.
Brill. So quite a gentle clip there to use to introduce the idea of consent to your teenagers, and a little bit of a funny one as well. They might know about it already, they might have seen it at school, but you could show them that clip and watch it together, gather their thoughts on it afterwards. To find that clip, just type it into YouTube. So cup of tea, consent, clean, and it will come up. So just a word of warning, if you don't put the word clean, you will end up with one with swearing in. You might be fine with that, your teenager might be fine with that, but just wanted to give you the heads up. So moving away now from relationships, I want us to all have a think about body image and all of those insecurities that our young people could be facing. I'm sure that tonight we all have our own insecurities here, and if I asked you to think about those or list them, they would come to your head straight away. But I'm going to take you back to being a teenager. So I'm going to take you back to that time when you started puberty and your hips might have widened, you might have got a bit hairier, you might have developed some acne, and generally you might be feeling a bit bigger and everything is quite new. So despite body image struggles being prevalent for most people, we need to acknowledge how this can really be amplified for teenagers, but especially for teenagers today. Stretch marks, body hair or lack of, size of muscles, breast size, acne, wearing glasses, size of belly, shape or size of nose, hairstyles, freckles, size of bum, length of legs, skin tone, smile, height, weight, birthmarks, scars, and I'm sure that there are plenty more that we could add to that list. So where do these insecurities come from? If we were speaking to you around kind of 15 years ago, we might have said models in magazines. We might have said those magazines that we would pick up from Tesco maybe once a week or once a fortnight perhaps. However, today is very different. Young people are now exposed to unrealistic beauty standards on a daily basis, hourly basis, even every minute. So we're thinking about Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Snapchat, the list goes on. In fact, recently, 40% of young people said the images that they saw on social media caused them to feel worried about their body image. Not only are young people exposed on the daily to the perfect body type by having easy access to the social media of celebrities and models, they now also have very easy access to influencers. I'm sure that a lot of us have heard our young people talk about influencers or social media stars, but just in case anyone hasn't, these are people who use their social media platforms as kind of part of their job to create content and advertise products. So they're often much more accessible to our young people as they're not quite in that celebrity category, but more of your everyday person who has a real large following on social media. Now, don't get me wrong here, some influencers can be great. Some of them spread very positive messages, some of them are activists and contribute really well to society. However, we must also acknowledge that the large majority of influencers will conform to that perfect body type and those real high beauty standards. On top of influencers, models, celebrities, and now regular people are using filters and editing apps to totally change the way that they look online. I'm sure that most of us here will have used a filter to make us kind of feel a bit better about ourselves when uploading a photo. I know that I certainly have. But what I'm really talking about here is people using editing software to totally change their appearance, the way that they look, maybe the way that their face looks or their body looks, which is totally unrealistic, like those photos that we have on our screen now. We also know that there are other areas that can affect our young people's body image, like maybe feeling that they're not attractive enough, feeling as though their body shape is not represented in the media, struggling to find clothes for their body, for example, if they were to have a physical disability, comments made by friends, comments made by peers, adverts, health campaigns, or even lessons at school around kind of what a healthy body is. What I'm trying to get at here is that everyone has insecurities, but now more than ever, there is a lot of added pressure for our young people to feel that they need to look a certain way to be accepted. Relationships with our bodies are incredibly complex, and then adding kind of the past 5 or so years of this real influx of extreme editing and kind of surgery and fillers really becoming that norm, it's clear why young people may struggle with their body image. So I just want to show you a clip now, which really kind of shows how easily someone's whole appearance can be changed as a result of like an editing software such as Photoshop.
Okay, so very 5 please, cameras rolling. And we're recording sound. Play it.
So another clip that you could maybe share with your young people. I think it's been said within the chat, but we will be sending out all of these links for all of the clips that we're seeing tonight, so you can share those with your young people. But Dove, the brand in particular, have made quite a few different videos where they kind of show just how quickly someone's appearance can be totally changed. Okay, so an additional challenge that boys in particular may face is toxic masculinity. So toxic masculinity is incredibly complex and something that has developed over many years. All of the topics that we've spoken about tonight so far, we could have spent the whole session talking about, but this one in particular is the most difficult to summarise. So let's try and start with what it is. So toxic masculinity can be described as a set of cultural norms that are associated with men and boys and ultimately do harm to our men and boys. Toxic masculinity is often linked with suicide, and we sadly know that around 75% of all suicides are men. So toxic masculinity is that idea around how society treats boys and men. We have some examples on screen, which kind of show how we have this idea around how boys and men must be strong, shouldn't cry. That idea that boys being told to man up if they hurt themselves would also fall under this category. Toxic masculinity is nobody's fault. We are all born with this bias. In fact, research has even shown us that people will treat a baby bump differently if they know that that baby bump is a boy compared to a girl. People tend to be rougher with a boy bump and more gentle with a girl bump. They will also talk to that bump differently and use a slightly different tone of voice. So this stuff really is so unconscious, and like I said before, has developed over many years. But we know that these societal norms of how we treat boys and girls differently will impact our young people. By using these phrases of boys, such as don't be a wimp, be a man, or don't be a pussy, will go on to impact the rest of their lives. So it might impact how they seek help in the future, for example. We all know those statistics around men going to the doctors far less than women. It will impact how they see themselves and how they will see women and girls. We cannot solve this issue overnight. It will take years, but we can all do our bit by staying mindful around how we treat our boys and young men compared to how we potentially treat our girls. Despite them maybe not showing us as much as a girl might, they need just as much nurturing, support and love. So another clip for tonight, I want to show you this clip, which is a slightly longer clip than what we've seen so far tonight, but it's a really powerful one. So it involves a man talking about toxic masculinity and his own awareness of how he treats or how he has treated his son and daughter differently. So that really kind of summarizes this topic about toxic masculinity. Again, I just want to put a bit of a warning here that it is a really emotive and can be at times quite a difficult clip to watch. It does discuss rape, so if you feel that this may be difficult for you, again, please do mute us and come back in around 10 minutes time.
So I grew up in New York City, between Harlem and the Bronx. Growing up as a boy, we was taught that men had to be tough, had to be strong, had to be courageous, dominating, no pain, no emotions, with the exception of anger and definitely no fear. That men are in charge, which means women are not. That men lead, and you should just follow and just do what we say. That men are superior, women are inferior. That men are strong, women are weak. That women are of less value, property of men, and objects, particularly sexual objects. I've later come to know that to be the collective socialization of men, better known as the man box. See, this man box has in it all the ingredients of how we define what it means to be a man. Now, I also want to say, without a doubt, there are some wonderful, wonderful, absolutely wonderful things about being a man. Well, at the same time, there's some stuff that's just straight up twisted. And we really need to begin to challenge, look at it, and really get in the process of deconstructing, redefining what we come to know as manhood. This is my two at home, Kendall and Jade. They're 11 and 12. Kendall's 15 months older than Jade. There's a period of time, you know, when my wife, her name is Tammy, and I, we just got real busy and whip, whip, bip, bam, boom, Kendall and Jade. All right? And when they were about 5 and 6, 4 and 5, you know, Jade could come to me. It didn't matter, come to me crying, you know. It didn't matter what she was crying about. She can get on my knees, she can snot my sleeve up, just cry it out, Daddy got you, that's all that's important. Now Kendall, on the other hand, and like I said, he's only 15 months older than her, he come to me crying. It's like as soon as I would hear him crying, a clock would go off. You know, I would give the boy probably about 30 seconds, which means by the time he got to me, I was already saying things like, why you crying? Hold your head up, look at me, explain to me what's wrong. Tell me what's wrong. I can't understand you why you're crying. And out of my own frustration of my role and responsibility of building him up as a man to fit into these guidelines and these structures that are defining this man box, I would find myself saying things like, just go in your room. Just go on in your room, sit down, get yourself together, and come back and talk to me when you could talk to me like a what? Like a man. And he's 5 years old. And you know, as I grow in life, I would say to myself, my God, what's wrong with me? What am I doing? You know, why would I do this? And I think back to my father. There was a time in my life where we had a very troubled experience in our family. My brother Henry, he died tragically when we was teenagers. We lived in New York City, as I said, we lived in the Bronx at the time. And the burial was a place called Long Island. It was about 2 hours outside of the city. And as we were preparing to come back from the burial, you know, the cars stopped at the bathroom, you know, to let folks take care of themselves for the long ride back to the city. And the limousine empties out. My mother, my sisters, my auntie, they all get out, but my father and I stayed in the limousine. And no sooner than the women got out, he burst out crying. He didn't want to cry in front of me, but he knew he wasn't going to make it back to the city. It was better me than to allow himself to express these feelings and emotions in front of the women. And this is a man who 10 minutes ago had just put his teenage son in the ground. Something I just can't even imagine. The thing that sticks with me the most is that he was apologizing to me for crying in front of me. And at the same time, he was also giving me props, lifting me up for not crying. You know, I come to also look at this as this fear that we have as men, this fear that just have us paralyzed, holding us hostage to this man box. I can remember speaking to a 12-year-old boy, a football player, and I asked him, I said, how would you feel if in front of all the players, your coach told you you were playing like a girl? Now, I expected him to say something like, I'll be sad, I'll be mad, I'll be angry, or something like that. No, the boy said to me, it would destroy me. And I said to myself, God, if it would destroy him to be called a girl, what are we then teaching him about girls? It took me back to a time when I was about 12 years old. I grew up in tenement buildings, you know, in the inner city. And at this time, we're living in the Bronx. And in the building next to where I lived, there was a guy named Johnny. He was about 16 years old, and we were all about 12 years old, younger guys. And he was hanging out with all us younger guys. And this guy, he was up to a lot of no good. He was the kind of kid where parents would have to wonder, what is this 16-year-old boy doing with these 12-year-old boys? And he did spend a lot of time up to no good. He was a troubled kid. You know, his mother had died from a heroin overdose. He was being raised by his grandmother. His father wasn't on the set. His grandmother had 2 jobs. He was home alone a lot. But I gotta tell you, we young guys, we looked up to this dude, man. He was cool. He was fine. That's what his sister said. He was fine, right? He was having sex. You know, we all looked up to him. So one day I'm out in front of the house doing something, just playing around, doing something, I don't know what. He looks out his window, he calls me upstairs. He said, hey, Amp, they called me Anthony growing up as a kid. Hey, Anthony, come on upstairs. Johnny called, you go. So I run right upstairs. As he opens the door, he says to me, do you want some? Now, I immediately knew what he meant, because for me growing up at that time and our relationship with this man box, do you want some meant one or two things, sex or drugs. And we weren't doing drugs. Now, my box, my card, my man box card was immediately in jeopardy. 2 things. One, I never had sex. We don't talk about that as men. You only tell your dearest, closest friends, sworn secrecy for life, the first time you had sex. For everybody else, we go around like we've been having sex since we was 2. There ain't no first time. The other thing I couldn't tell him is that I didn't want any. You know, that's even worse. We're supposed to always be on the prowl. Women are objects, especially sexual objects. So anyway, I couldn't tell him any of that. So like my mother would say, make a long story short, I just simply said to Johnny, yes. He told me go in his room. I go in his room, on his bed is a girl from the neighborhood named Sheila. She's 16 years old, she's nude. She is what I know today to be mentally ill, higher functioning at times than others. We had a whole choice worth, you know, inappropriate names for her. But anyway, Johnny had just gotten through having sex with her. Well, he actually raped her, but he would say he had sex with her because while Sheila never said no, she also never said yes. So he was offering me the opportunity to do the same. So when I go in the room, I close the door. Folks, I'm petrified. I stand with my back to the door so Johnny can't bust in the room and see that I'm not doing anything. And I stand there long enough that I could have actually done something. So now I'm no longer trying to figure out what I'm gonna do. I'm trying to figure out how I'm gonna get out of this room. So in my 12 years of wisdom, I zip my pants down, I walk out into the living room, and lo and behold to me, while I was in the room with Sheila, Johnny was back at the window calling guys up. So now it's a living room full of guys, like, you know, like the waiting room in the doctor's office. And they asked me, how was it? And I say to them, it was good. And I zip my pants up in front of them, and I head for the door. Now, I say this all with remorse, and I was feeling a tremendous amount of remorse at that time, but I was conflicting. Because while I was feeling remorse, I was excited, because I didn't get caught, but I knew I felt bad about what was happening. This fear of getting outside the man box totally enveloped me. It was way more important to me about me and my man box card than about Sheila and what was happening to her. See, collectively, we as men are taught to have less value in women, to view them as property and the objects of men. We see that as an equation that equals violence against women. We as men, good men, the large majority of men, We operate on the foundation of this whole collective socialization. We kind of see ourselves separate, but we're very much a part of it. You see, we have to come to understand that less value, property, and objectification is the foundation, and the violence can't happen without it. So we're very much a part of the solution as well as the problem. The Centers for Disease Control says that men's violence against women is at epidemic proportions. It's the #1 health concern for women in this country and abroad. So quickly, I'd like to just say, this is my love of my life, my daughter Jade. The world I envision for her. How do I want men to be acting and behaving? I need you on board. I need you with me. I need you working with me and me working with you on how we raise our sons and teach them to be men. That it's okay to not be dominating. That it's okay to have feelings and emotions. That it's okay to promote equality. That it's okay to have women who are just friends and that's it. That it's okay to be whole. That my liberation as a man is tied to your liberation as a woman. I remember asking a 9-year-old boy, what would life be like for you if you didn't have to adhere to this man box? He said to me, I would be free. Thank you, folks.
Hey, I hope you're all okay. I know that's a tough clip to watch at times, isn't it? So do look after yourselves, but it really was worth watching. And the full talk, it's a TED talk. We'll put the link in the chat if you wanted to watch the whole talk. So we are going to take you right back to the absolute basics now when we're talking about you and your teenagers. So any of you who have done any kind of psychology work or looked at your teenagers' homework will recognise this pyramid as being based on Maslow's hierarchy of need. So Abraham Maslow proposed this theory way back in 1943, but it's just as relevant today as it was back then. So the basic idea is that the needs lower down on this pyramid must be satisfied before individuals can attend to their needs higher up. So if a young person's basic needs are not being met, they will have little or no opportunity to reach their potential. There is a lot of evidence about why children living in poverty don't do well in school. And actually looking at this, it's really obvious to see that if they're worried about where their next meal is going to come from, how are they supposed to focus on a maths project? So let's just look at that basic bottom line of this pyramid: water, food, warmth and rest. So let's think about these basics before anything else around bringing up our teenagers. So is breakfast available? Is their bed and their duvet clean and comfortable? And this is where nurture really plays a huge part in all of this. Those little tiny things, never underestimate them. They can make such a huge difference. I know that most teenagers live in their bedrooms and their bedrooms are an absolute state. But simple things like making their bed for them or opening a window can make them feel so much better. I get there are times that you may not want to do this. They made that mess, let them live in it. But we all know that feeling of getting into a clean bed, when your bedding's just been washed, when you've had a rough day. And our children need this feeling too. And believe it or not, your teenagers still want to spend time with you. Yes, of course, they're on their phone, their laptop, they're playing games, they're talking to their friends, they're watching YouTube, they're eating snacks, and they're doing all this while convincing you that they're doing homework. But they are still looking to you for guidance. So role model having water with you, taking time out to do things that you like, making your bed in the mornings, all those basic needs. You need to be role modeling those to your teenagers. So many families have found that shared meals as a family have become a bit of a luxury that they've lost. Sitting around the dining table, if you even have one, every night as a family can seem like something out of a storybook. Some of the reason of that may be the pace of life. You and your children have so many competing demands on your time. You're running here, there and everywhere that sometimes it's really hard to find an hour each evening when you can all be together. So thinking about the food part of this, let's just take that pressure off. Maybe just try once a week or once a month even to eat as a family. Even that will have a huge impact. Try and find one night, mark it on the calendar and commit to it. Maybe ask a different member of the family each week or each month to plan that meal. Get them to do the shopping, to lay the table, or help with the preparation. That shared responsibility. Now, your family is a team. It shouldn't just be down to you. Things like TikTok, they're full of great recipe ideas that your teenager may want to share with you. But actually, even 3 or 4 different microwave meals on the sofa, eaten at the same time, is something. One of the positive side effects of sharing family meals is that it really does allow everyone there to feel valued and appreciated. That's a core need for teenagers that you have managed to find just an hour to give to them. It's that emotional warmth that they need. And rest is also on the bottom part of this pyramid. So we saw that from the teenager brain slide. Teenagers need sleep, and our advice, let them. Unless there's a real need for them to be out of bed in the morning, like school or a job, obviously, just let them sleep. You and they will feel much better for it. So we just want to leave you tonight with these final messages that young people going through the process of adolescence need what they've always needed from their parents. They want your love, your support, your encouragement, your nurture, your acceptance, and your attention. And the difference for teenagers is that while younger children need their parents to be in the lead, pulling them along and directing their steps and making all those important decisions, teenagers need us to be by their side, give them the chance to stride out in front, but be there to take the reins and the lead when necessary. Your teenagers really want to be noticed by you. Too often, because they're being moody and they withdraw into themselves, we respond by ignoring them. If they're rude to us, we might swap rooms and ignore them again. And ignoring bad behaviour and not rising to it is one thing. Ignoring the person who is annoying us is something different. And it becomes a pattern, doesn't it? When they mope, we ignore them, so they mope even more because we're convinced that they do not care. And they're convinced that we do not care. So it does become a bit of a vicious cycle. So we want to leave you with just 4 basic guidelines tonight, really, to think about. Please make sure they know that you love them and you're proud of them. You cannot tell them this enough. They need to hear it. Even when things are busy and stressful and it feels like you're in survival mode, a word or a hug can reassure them a huge amount. Praise them for what they do well while encouraging them to do new things. While you're giving this outpouring of love, they may well shrug you off or look embarrassed, but still try and do it. Be honest with them, especially about your feelings. You do not have to be perfect. There are hundreds of parenting manuals out there telling you lots of different things, but you do not have to be perfect. We all get things wrong. We all shout, we say unkind things from time to time. If this happens, say sorry to your teenager afterwards and explain why it happened. And they will hopefully learn from you that it's okay to make mistakes and that it doesn't make you a bad person. If you're struggling with something, let them see this and let them see how you work it through to get to a solution. So be clear in your house about what is and what is not acceptable and tell them why. Teenagers really need to know what is okay and what is not, and what will happen if they cross that line. Follow through on what you say, because otherwise they're going to get confused and stop respecting those boundaries you're trying to put in. You are still in charge and people feel safe with rules and expectations. Imagine being in, a new unfamiliar building and not knowing where to go or what to do, with no signposting and no one explaining anything to you. That will make you feel very unsafe. And our teenagers need those boundaries wrapped around them to make them feel safe. And remember, you are the parent. Own that role. Do not be afraid to make those tough decisions. If your child sees that you fear their reaction or you always give in to them, it makes them feel powerful, which can be very frightening for all of you. Children need to know that you are there to keep them safe. So we are coming to the end soon of tonight's session. It would be great if when we finish, you could tell your teenager where you've been and what you've listened to. If you can, give your prickly teenager a hug. Just a 20-second hug releases something called oxytocin, which not only creates a strong bond between the two huggers, but it also boosts your immune system. It increases happiness, it reduces blood pressure, and therefore reduces your stress. Offer your teenager a hug and try and hold on for 20 seconds. It's good for them and it's good for you. Tell them why you're doing it. But before Chloe returns to close tonight, we just want to show you, it is a very old comedy sketch about our lovely children turning into teenagers, but it is quite funny and it is very, very true.
Only 30 seconds to go before I'm 13, 29, 28, 27. Boing. Can I have some more ice cream, Mum?
Kevin, you've eaten all the ice cream in the house, remember?
Oh, yeah. Duh. Bloody hell, I'm thick, Mr. Bean. Oh, no. Oh, no. 15, 14, 13. Up against Super Mario Kart. Boom, bam, bam, boom, bam, bam, boom, bam, bam. I don't have to go to bed tonight, do I?
Yes, in 5 minutes. Remember, you've still got school tomorrow.
Oh, yeah. Duh, Brian. Yeah, I'm 13.
Happy birthday, Kevin.
Happy birthday to me! Happy birthday to me! Happy birthday, Dick! Go! Go!
Kevin?
Go!
Are you all right?
Darling, he's losing the power of rational thought.
And the use of his arms.
He's become a teenager.
Kevin!
What?
It's your birthday, Kevin.
I know!
Happy birthday, Kevin!
Okay, stop going on about it, will you? Why is there no bloody ice cream?
Oh, come on, Kevin. You've eaten 5 tubs on your own this evening, remember?
So unfair, I hate you!
Kevin, don't speak to your mum and I like that.
What? I didn't say anything! What?
No, Kevin, that is for the morning.
Can't do anything anymore!
Oh, well, seeing as you've started, at least it'll cheer him up.
Well, you said you wanted Super Mario Kart.
I hate Super Mario, it's sad! I want a bloody high five!
Right, that's it, off to bed.
I am not going to bed, I'm going out!
Oh, don't be so stupid, Kevin. You can't go out now.
Why not?
Because it's 12 o'clock, it's way past your bedtime, it's pouring with rain outside, it's dangerous for the child on his own, you've got nowhere to go, and you've got school tomorrow.
That is so unfair, I hate you! All right then, I will go to bed, okay? Happy?
Good night, Kevin.
Don't bloody shout at me!
Don't worry, darling. It's only a phase. It'll only last for 4 or 5 years.
Just a funny little clip there to end tonight's topics on, which I know were quite serious at times. So I do really hope you're all feeling okay after that bit of comic relief. So before we finish tonight, we want to just leave you with a little bit of signposting to a few different services. We will be giving you more detailed information at the end of week 3 after all of our sessions. So information searching is where the internet is a really good thing. We don't want to bombard you with information, especially because things really change so quickly. So the main ones to support you further with things that we've looked at tonight are on your screen now. We appreciate that not everyone here tonight is from Devon, so there is some generic information on here from Parent Talk and the NSPCC. Space run the youth services in Devon in particular, and they're always happy to talk to parents. And Fear Free also have lots of useful toolkits and safety information that you can download from their website. Finally, Pinpoint Devon has lots and lots of different services listed that you may find useful. And just a quick bit of advertising that we are also running sessions on a Thursday evening for the next 3 weeks. So starting this Thursday coming up. So these sessions are aimed at parents and carers of slightly younger children. So not quite as hard hitting, but still hopefully just as powerful. So do come along if you do have younger children, or please do let your friends and family know. There is a QR code on the screen now, which you should be able to scan on your smartphone and sign up to these sessions if you wanted to. And also just a note that the Community and Safety Partnership will be running a session on growing up in porn culture. This session will be taking place on Wednesday, the 18th of October at 7 p.m. And the link has already been added to this chat if you can just scroll up and find it if you're interested in attending those. So finally, just a massive thank you so much for coming along to this session tonight. It's been so great having you all here and seeing all of those lovely comments in the chat. We really do hope that you can all take away something useful from this session. It really does help us if you can scan the QR code on your screen now. So that's the QR code at the top of your screen. That's just to share some feedback on how you found tonight, as it really helps with all the kind of funding that we might be able to receive to run these sessions again. And then if you aren't booked on to next week or the week after, scan that bottom QR code and you'll be able to sign up for the following sessions. And again, just a final note, we do appreciate that it has been tricky tonight and we have discussed some really serious topics. So please do go and make sure that you unwind a little bit before you go to bed. We will be here again next week, next Tuesday, same time as tonight. We will be covering different content next week, and we do need to warn you that, like Emma said, it is probably our toughest week next week. We will be looking at very serious risks such as county lines and exploitation. Be thinking some more about those unhealthy teenage relationships. But it would be really great for you to all join us again next week, so we do hope to see you then. Please do also follow Emma and I on our Facebook and Instagram. After all 3 of these sessions, we will be sharing further resources and ideas. If you type in Safety and Resilience Consultancy, you should be able to find us on social media. We will let you go now. If you can talk with your young person about what you've been doing tonight, that would be great. Or if you can just pop your head in and say goodnight to them around their bedroom door. Maybe ask if they fancy a hot chocolate with you, or unwind, or an offer of a snack to share. Thank you again so much for joining us. It's a really privilege to speak to you all, and we hope to see you again next week. Thank you.